Hi there. I thought it'd be easier just to make a quick video here to help you with your questions instead of trying to write it all in an email. I went through your study guide and there were, in addition to the questions you had in your email, I found a couple other things that I thought I could go over with you that would also probably help you. So I pulled some different problems here from your study guide. This is number 20, and it was a mixed fraction, 5 and 38/50ths, and you're supposed to reduce this, and actually I think it was write it as an improper fraction. Now I'm forgetting, but I think you had to reduce it and write it as an improper fraction. So to reduce it, the very first thing you want to do is just reduce this part here. And that's just a matter of figuring out what goes into both 38 and into 50. I think at the very least, they're both even numbers, so I could divide each of those by 2 and then reduce that fraction that way. So it's going to be a 5, and a 40 divided by 2 would be 20. I guess I'm just trying to do some mental math because you won't have a calculator on your test. But if 40 is divided by 2 is 20, 38 divided by 2 is 19. However you want to do that division. And then it would be 50 divided by 2 is 25. So I could reduce it, and then it would be reduced as far as the mixed fraction. If I want to turn that into an improper fraction, that means I don't want the whole number separate from I don't want this whole number part separate from the fraction part. To change that to an improper fraction, we always take the whole number times the denominator. So 5 times 25. And then after you multiply here, you add in the 19. So multiply to the denominator, add the 19. That would get me 5 times the 25 and then add 19 to it. 5 times 25 is $1, or I always think money when I multiply by 25. Okay, so it's like I was thinking $1.25 or 125 plus the 19. Sorry, my pen doesn't work very good here. And then if I add the 19 to the 125, sometimes it helps if you write it just below it and do like addition that way. So that's going to be 14. So 144. That becomes your new numerator. It's going to be a 144. It's still going to be a fraction, and you always keep the same denominator. So since my denominator was 25, it is still 25. So this would have been that fraction reduced and written as an improper fraction. That's kind of a common process of changing that to an improper fraction for your future math classes, so that would be a good one to go over. The next thing that I saw were a couple of these where you had to take and subtract, and you missed both of those, so I thought I would go over that as well. The first one was number 9. You have a 55 and you're going to subtract 42 and 11/16. To subtract this fraction part here, I kind of need this to have a fraction part, and I really would like it to have a denominator of 16, so then I could subtract that way. So I think what I would do on this particular problem is I would look at this 55 and I would change it, and it's like I'm borrowing 1 from it. I'm going to call it a 54. And I'm going to borrow 1, that's why it's now that, but I'm going to call it 54 and 16/16. 16/16 is 1. So it's 54 with another 1. That's where that 55 comes in. By doing that, the bottom part I'm not going to change. I'm just going to leave it minus 42 and 11/16. And now I can subtract these. 16, I do the different parts. 16/16 minus 11/16 is 5/16. And 54 minus 42 is just 12. And that would be the subtraction part of that. And that's just one way to do it. It seemed pretty easy for the one that they gave you there. So let's try that again. The other one you missed was 14. It's similar, it's just written horizontally. But again, I'm going to have to work with the whole number parts and work with the fraction parts. The problem with this is my 1/4 conveniently has another fraction that's in fourths, but I can't take 1/4 and subtract 3/4 because 1/4 isn't big enough. So I'm still going to borrow 1 from this 38, and I'm going to think of that 38 as really a 37 and 4/4. But you also have this 1/4. So not only do you have a 4/4, but you have a 1/4. It's really going to turn into 37 and 5/4 is what that is. Because 5/4 is greater than 1. This is like 1 and a 4th attached to your 37. Okay, by changing this to a 5/4, I'm now going to be able to subtract that 3/4. Then I can take the 37 minus the 14, that's going to get me a 23, and 5/4 minus 3/4 is 2/4. They would expect you to reduce that, though. 2/4 is a nice little fraction that can reduce. 23 and 2/4 would be really 23 and 1/2. Now that's a mixed fraction. If they happen to ever want it as an improper fraction, then you have to go back and you have to do the 23 times 2, that'd be 46, add the 1, that'd be 47, and then you keep the same denominator. That would be the same as a 47 over 2. So pay attention to the directions. I don't have them written and it's not in front of me right now. If they want the mixed fraction, you'd leave it like this, but if it specifically says an improper, this is what they want you to do. All right, now let's talk about more what you were asking as far as those fractions and when does it flip and that kind of thing. On this problem you missed, it says 1/3 of 1/9. Of always means to multiply. So I'm going to take 1/3 and I'm going to multiply it times 1/9. When you multiply fractions, you always multiply them straight across. So in this case, I would end up with a 1 over 27. In this case, there was no flipping. When you multiply, so here's the thing, I think this is answering your question. When you multiply, you just multiply straight across and they are where they are. It's when you divide that you have to think about the flipping. So this was number 13. When I'm working with fractions, it's kind of helpful if they're both fractions. So I'm going to change my 4 to 4 over 1. And I'm going to divide by 24/49. Anytime you divide fractions, you immediately multiply by the reciprocal. So I'm going to take this thing, the reciprocal is your fraction flipped. So right here, when I change this to a multiplication sign instead of a division, I now flip that fraction. Now it's a 49 over a 24. And since I'm now multiplying, I can multiply straight across. It is always a good idea to look to see if you can reduce anything. And you can reduce as long as there's something in the top and something in the bottom. So like this 4, what I'm looking at here, then this 4 and this 24, that can reduce because 4 goes into both of those. I'm going to divide each of those by 4. If I take this and divide it by 4, it would turn into just a 1, and if I take 24 and divide by 4, it'll become a 6. That just helps keep your numbers smaller. Once you've reduced anything that you can, now you're ready to do the multiply straight across. When you multiply straight across here, it's now a 1 times 49, so that's going to be 49. And on the bottom, it's going to be a 1 times a 6, that's a 6. And that's your answer. It happens to be an improper fraction. And so this was another one where you had that flipped. It was actually one of these equation ones. And the way this is set up is you're taking a 7/6 and it's being multiplied by this x. So to solve this, we would have to divide by 7x. It's kind of weird because we're dividing by this fraction to make that whole thing go away. That's kind of ugly. Divide by 7/6. It worked nicely here to make everything cancel and go away. All I have left is this x, so I'm going to have x equals, and then it's -6. Now I showed it as a big division fraction bar, but you can also write it like this, divided by 7/6. And now it looks like that last problem we had. So x equals -6, I'm going to put it over 1, and I'm going to change that division. Here's where you have to flip it. Change division to multiplication and flip the fraction. Once you do that, you are able to multiply straight across. Looks like I got a -36. Multiply straight across, I get a 7. There's your answer. All right, so I hit a couple things. Hopefully I answered your question plus a little bit more. Good luck. Keep studying.